Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 5 of Kevin's Novel Ideas. Thanks for joining me today. Um, as you well know, I like to share some of the recent books I've read, and today I'd like to share you. This one will be a little bit different, actually, talking about health and weight and things like that. And the book I read is called Nature Wants Us to Be Fat: The Surprising Science Behind Why We Gain Weight and How We Can Prevent It and Reverse It. So, and this was written by Dr. Richard Johnson. So, again, I encourage you to read this, but let me get into a little bit about, let me talk a little bit about my background first. Um, Many of you probably know me, and, I've always kind of struggled with my weight. I'm always looking for a reason to be fat, a reason outside myself. One being, you start out with big bones, water weight. I've used them all. Slow metabolism, and sometimes it always all boils down to eating one too many Twinkies. But we'll get into kind of the Dr. Johnson's theory here. I've always been heavy set pretty much all my life. Um, I guess they call that obese now. We used to call it husky or heavy set back in the day. I kind of prefer heavy set or husky. I don't know what you think. Um, but I've never really would have say I've struggled with my weight. It's just kind of always been there. I guess as I've gotten older, it becomes more of an issue, as you can imagine, as far as mobility and knees and joints and things like that. So I've tried to manage it a little bit better, but I think most of my adult life I've kind of swung. I've sort of hit this plateau, and I've swung maybe 30 to 40 pounds less and 30 to 40 pounds more than I'm currently at. Depending on whether I've watched my weight or watched what I've eaten a little bit more during certain periods of time, or exercised more during certain periods of time. But I kind of always come back to sort of this certain kind of set weight. And I know there's theories about having, it's sort of everyone's kind of got a natural weight. I guess that's one of the excuses I use also. That's kind of like, well, this is kind of what my natural weight is. But I'm curious about. Obviously, there's a lot of talk now, and we'll get into some of the science behind some of the weight loss medicine that's coming into play now with the GLP-1s and Ozempic and Manjaro and all of that seem to be getting a heavy use now. I don't know how I feel about those. I don't like the idea that you need to take a drug to lose weight and that you have to be on it the rest of your life. But some of the science sort of makes sense, and we'll get into that a little later in this discussion in regards to kind of the brain science behind that. But basically, this book, which Nature Wants Us to Be Fat, which kind of came out as I was strolling through my Libby app and trying to figure out new books to read. This one kind of jumped off the page at me, and I'm like, oh, Nature Wants Us to Be Fat. There we have it. Now I've got a reason. So I've always wondered why it seems some people can eat much more than others, but not seem to gain weight, and this sort of gets into that. But anyways, well, Dr. Richard Johnson, who wrote this book, is an internationally acclaimed scientist. He's a professor of medicine at the University of Colorado, and clearly he's done a lot of research into what makes us fat. And he's got a theory behind it, and I'll roll out the theory, and you can either buy into it or not. But I encourage you to read the book. As I've said before, I sort of cover just the very high level basics on the kind of the outlines of these books. But clearly, there's a lot more inside the book, and I encourage you to read the book if you have some curiosity about the topic, and hopefully, what I say today will spark some curiosity about this topic. So Dr. Johnson proposes, and his main theory here is that there is something called the fat switch. And he also calls it the survival switch. He kind of goes back and forth between the two of them. And so let me get into a little bit. Wait, what? There's a fat switch? what what is he talking about? I mean, where the heck is this switch, and why am I only hearing about this now? Uh, it would have been good to know about the fat switch early on, because if there's a switch somewhere in my body, or something that I could do to turn that switch off, as long as it's easy and doesn't inconvenience me or the things I like to eat, I'm all about it. So let me kind of lay out. So I've jumped a little bit ahead with jumping to the fat switch. So let me step back a little bit and present Dr. Johnson's theory. And to do so, we have to consider human history and evolution. And if you don't believe in evolution or natural selection, this might not be the book for you. So, but I'm kind of taking it for granted that most of us believe in science and evolution. I'm not anti-religion at all, but I think they can go together, religion and science. And maybe I'll talk about that in another book because I think that's a fascinating topic also. I don't think they're mutually exclusive topics. And I've read several books on those theories too, so maybe I'll bring that up later. But getting into Dr. Johnson's theory and sort of the human history and evolutionary impact of that, let me read a little bit from the book. This was actually in the foreword to the book. And he sort of explains natural selection and kind of leading up to his theory here. So let me read a little bit from the book. Natural selection, or more appropriately genetic selection, is the process whereby the environment in which a particular organism lives selects specific variations in genetic constitution that are most advantageous for survival, and these variations are passed from generation to generation. As such, whether the genetic makeup of an organism proves beneficial or not is very much context dependent as it relates to the environment in which it is trying to survive. So I think we're all familiar with Darwin's theory of natural selection and evolution, that he was on a boat, the Beagle, visited the Galapagos Islands and saw these animals that he kind of determined that they had developed certain characteristics based upon natural selection, and that was his theory. And this has kind of been proven out over time through genetic research as we've gotten more technology to study this. So that's the basis for natural selection. So to go further, as Dr. Johnson so eloquently reveals, our distant primate ancestors faced such an environmental challenge many millions of years ago. A cooling planet over millions of years, with its consequent decline in food availability, presented an environmental pressure favoring genes that could maximize survival. This new genetic constitution was one that provided a survival advantage by allowing our distant forebears the ability to more aggressively make and store fat, a powerfully effective physiological advantage during times of food scarcity. No doubt these genetic changes provided advantages even for our more recent human ancestors, whose success at hunting and gathering was not always guaranteed. Indeed, for almost the entire history of human existence, our food security has been tenuous. And I'm a big believer in sort of, you really have to go back in history to understand humans. We tend to be very now focused and have a very short historical perspective, and that works in some sense because technology is changing. Our systems of government have changed drastically in the last 500 years. We didn't have the printing press till 500 years ago. Now we're reading, we have computers, we have artificial intelligence. So somewhat, when you look back in history, it might not be totally relevant. But I think as far as physiology and biology, I think evolutionary changes in human beings take a lot of time to show up. And so I think we're still sort of not prehistoric, but we haven't caught up to technology. And a little bit of this book has to deal with that. We are based upon this natural selection, our prehistoric ancestors over millions of years. I mean, recorded history is what, 10,000 years? I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands of years, and millions if you kind of go back to our, pre-Homo sapien ancestors, developing over time in Africa and things like that. As I said, you kind of got to believe in evolution to kind of to understand this theory or buy into it. But if you're given that, it takes a long time to develop to change through natural selection. So I think that is sort of the basis here, that over time, and you could imagine, survival is a key. Survival was and is sort of the key trait in humans, right? Even today, we do things to survive, right? I think our instinct, there's our fear instinct, there's our fight or flee instinct. We still have all these mechanisms in our physiology and biology that are based upon sort of this prehistoric human that kind of developed through natural selection. So that kind of gets us to, in his theories, that were part of that survival was storage of fat, because we couldn't rely on food sources. There was climate change in the past, as he indicated. Ice ages. Ice ages was fairly recently, I think, too. I think, if I remember correctly, like 20, 30,000 years ago, there was an ice age, even during the hunter and gathering stage of our existence. So I think he hints on that here, that food sources are tenuous. So we built up the ability over time through evolution, through our physical bodies, to have the ability to store fat effectively to get through those stages when we had food scarcity. So not a bad thing in evolutionary in prehistoric times, but now let me catch you up to where we're at currently. So let me go on in this, but he goes on. But with the development of agriculture some 14 to 17,000 years ago, that situation changed quite suddenly and dramatically. This event, the so-called agricultural revolution, confronted human physiology with intense environmental stress of a different sort. Within a few short millennia, calories derived mostly from carbohydrate-rich crops became abundant and ultimately dominated the human diet. The change was so rapid that adaptive genetics couldn't come into play. As such, a threatening environment, evolutionary mismatch, took shape that continues to threaten our health to this very day. Our genetic makeup continues to prepare our bodies for food scarcity, making and storing fat whenever we are exposed to an abundance of carbohydrates, particularly fructose. In essence, we are constantly preparing for a winter that never comes, despite what they said in Game of Thrones. Winter is coming. And truly, human physiology, so well adapted to the environments faced by our ancestors, is less well suited to what we experience in our modern world, especially as it relates to food. Our mission, if we are to achieve better health, is to bring our environment and our genetics into better alignment. And while we can't as yet speed the evolutionary process or initiate specific changes in our genome, even though, side note, that might be something that's on the horizon, to bring it more in line with the world in which we live, we can absolutely influence the environmental side of this relationship. So that's sort of his kind of basis here. In regards to how we kind of got where we're at, and the effect of evolution on where we're at in the agricultural revolution that appeared fairly recently, and clearly with agricultural technology that we've developed during the industrial revolution, we have sort of, while we still have some good number of people starving in the world, primarily due to lack of distribution and other issues, we do have food abundance in general. So that raises the question, how bad is this problem? And so he gets into this, kind of showing more recently how it's become a bigger issue, right? And he kind of indicates sort of why that has changed. And you can imagine, I'll just go on. In 1890, obesity, using the same definition we use today, affected only 3% of American adults. And diabetes was present in only 2 or 3 out of every 100,000 individuals. High blood pressure was seen in fewer than 5% of Americans under the age of 65, and coronary artery disease was only being hypothesized as a cause of a rare strangling chest pains known as angina. Over the last century, all this has changed. Today, 30 to 40% of the U.S. population is obese, and 10 to 12% is diabetic. In some parts of the world, like Samoa, diabetes is present in 40 to 50% of the adult population. Likewise, high blood pressure affects 1/3 of adults, and heart disease is the number one cause of death. Almost no one lacks a family member or friend who suffers from one of these conditions. So I think we all know the prevalence, right? Um, there's no mystery or question that we've now have an obesity epidemic, right? Um, so the question then results is, so what have we done about it? If there's something, if it was something as simple as eating too much and exercising too little, as has been touted for decades. So we've been told exercise more, eat less, eat this, eat less of this, eat more of that. Fat is bad, fat is good. Eggs are bad, eggs are okay. There's been a million diets, keto, you name it, right? So if it was just a matter of that, then obesity should have been an easy condition to cure, right? Calories in, calories out, right? Why haven't we been able to kind of solve that problem? You might say, well, we lack discipline. There's some sort of mental defect in people who are fat. It's an addiction. We don't have willpower. I guess you could think all of those things, right? And there's theories on those too. But this is the theories he's come up with. And he's saying, well, if it was just one of those things, we probably would have figured out how to do it by now. But then there would be, I'll go on here, but then there would not be so many diet plans and exercise routines to choose from, or so much debate as to what approach is best. As it turns out, the problem is not with losing weight itself, because most plans accomplish this. Like I said, I've lost weight before. I think most people who have struggled with weight have had the ability to lose weight, right? We do it, we lose weight, and yet we can't keep the weight off. It comes back, right? So why does it come back? Is it that we lost the willpower? Is it hard to stay on a diet? I sort of get some of that, right? But he's saying there's something else we're struggling against here that's kind of been hidden in the background that we haven't taken into account. So he's saying, as it turns out, the problem is not with losing it itself, because most plans accomplish this. Rather, it is that we rarely sustain our weight loss, as if there is some underlying process that triggers us to regain the fat we fought so hard to lose. Once we are overweight, the excess pounds become an unwelcome companion for years to come. So he's saying there's this underlying process, this fat switch, this survival switch that we're triggering at some point that makes us put the weight back on. So why doesn't this work? In the course of our research, we identified a biological process, he says, that animals use to help survive. This process is most commonly triggered by the food they eat, of which fructose, a common type of sugar in our diets, turns out to be especially important, although other foods stimulate it as well. We call it the survival switch, as it turns on a whole series of physical and metabolic changes, as well as behaviors that protect animals in nature when food is not available. So I think we've all heard, we'll get into the difference between glucose, sugar, simple sugar, and that here shortly. But we've all heard about sugar in our diet, right? And so we'll get into that shortly, but I want to go on just a little bit in accordance to looking back on historically what we have done in regards to trying to fight being overweight as far as the diets and stuff. So he says, why are you gaining weight? The classical teaching, which dates back to the 1920s, is that we're becoming overweight and developing diabetes because foods are now less expensive and readily available, and advances in transportation and other technologies have resulted in us exercising less and sitting more. We all kind of have heard that before, right? The introduction of fast food, processed foods, and junk foods has made it easier to overeat, while elevators, escalators, trains, and automobiles have replaced the need to walk or bicycle. The internet, television, and smartphones have also made it easier and more enjoyable to stay at home. The equation is simple physics. We are eating too much and exercising too little. When too much energy is produced from food and too little energy used via exercise and other metabolic activities, the energy that is left over is stored as fat. So he's calling this the overnutrition theory, and I think most of us sort of makes sense, right? Calories in, calories out. We're now eating different foods, processed foods, fast foods. This has all kind of come up in the 21st century. And as I read the statistics, or the 20th century, and into the 21st century, as I've read the statistics, that's kind of when things started to kind of go awry. So this theory kind of makes sense, right? This overnutrition theory. Consistent with and he goes on, consistent with the so-called overnutrition hypothesis is evidence that food portions have increased. Over the last century, the size of most soft drinks increased from 7 to 10 to 12 and even more. Restaurants keep increasing the size of meals, and all-you-can-eat buffets are common. Studies also show that the average number of daily calories people are eating has increased over the last decades. One analysis by the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations reported that there are more than 24% increase in total caloric intake between 1961 and 2013, going from about 2,900 calories a day to 3,600. People are also less active. Obesity correlates with the amount of time people spend watching television or on the internet. Today, the average person spends about 10 to 12 hours on their cell phone or computer each day, but only about 17 minutes exercising. No wonder we are getting fat. There is a major problem with the overnutrition hypothesis, however. So, stop the presses. We have all kind of heard this in the past, and it's kind of made sense to us, right? That problem is not its conclusion that we are gaining weight because we are eating more while expending less energy, but rather it blames this phenomena solely on bad habits. That's what I like to hear. It's not my bad habits that's causing me to be fat. It's something else. But he's saying it's not solely on our bad habits. He's not saying that these don't contribute, but his hypothesis is that there's something underlying all of this that we aren't really factoring in. Our culture does encourage us to eat more and not be active, and it is a contributing reason for the epidemic. So he's giving a credit there. However, as we've learned from the survival switch, the root problem is biological. The main reason people are eating more today is that many of us, especially those of us who are overweight or obese, tend to be hungrier than usual because we are not getting a sensation of being full after we have eaten. Normally, we get a sensation of satiety. I know I said that wrong. After a meal because a hormone called leptin tells a region of the brain called the hypothalamus. Oh, now we're getting scientific now. To signal us to stop eating. Leptin is secreted by fat cells and levels vary in relation to insulin levels and BMI. However, people who are overweight respond poorly to the leptin signal, something called leptin resistance, and so remain hungry longer. This also explains why restaurants give us larger plates of food now than they did a few decades ago, not because they want us to feel we are getting a better deal, but because they know we will leave hungry if we don't. So this gets to the Ozempic and the drugs that we're seeing out there now. I believe that this is the leptin resistance. Our brains are not hearing that we are full, and therefore we continue to eat. So these new drugs influence that chemistry and override this leptin resistance. And his theory in regards to this fat survival switch and storing of fat, as he says, in regards to insulin levels and BMI, then trigger this leptin resistance. So it's kind of a cyclical kind of fat spiral, let us say, that we get into when this switch is triggered. So not only do we start storing fat, but then we've created this leptin resistance that says to our brain, oh, you're still hungry, you should continue to eat. And this is all biological because back in the day, if we needed to store fat because, we might have a famine or an ice age 6 months from now, that we can't feel full, right? If we feel full, we'll stop eating and stop storing fat. So we need to feel hungry and to continue to eat to store the fat. And that's kind of how our bodies have been set up to trigger this kind of cycle. It's kind of strange, but run with me on this. And so the new drugs are kind of trying to stop at least that part of the cycle, right? That we continue to eat, that we don't get the signal from our brain that we're full, right? That we're satiated. Interesting science there, but it doesn't have, it does part of it there, right? It gets us to stop eating, but it doesn't necessarily stop that survival switch from triggering. That gets more into what we're eating than how much we're eating. So very interesting stuff. So if it's not this overnutrition hypothesis, which he's talked about, and I sort of buy into his theory here. I mean, he's giving the overnutrition some of the credit for causing this epidemic of obesity, but he's also saying there's other things going on here, and I think some of the research with the new drugs, weight loss drugs, is kind of getting at that. But he's going to go even further than that. So let me go further in what he said here in chapter 2. People who are overweight also do not burn fat as well as those without excess fat. That sort of gets into my initial thing that I said, why does it seem some people are able to eat more and not gain weight? Well, first of all, they didn't have the weight to begin with, right? So people who are overweight do not, in fact, burn fat the same way that people who are not overweight do. He says we will learn more of what causes this later. Since they burn less fat, adipose tissue, A-D-I-P-O-S-E, tissue tends to accumulate. Meanwhile, when you burn less fat, you convert less stored energy to readable, usable energy. Your cells sense when these levels are low and interpret this as low energy state, despite the total energy in the cell, including that from fat being normal or high. There is some evidence that this can cause fatigue and also hunger. This compounds the effects of the leptin resistance, causing you to even eat more food until your levels finally rise high enough that your hunger is satisfied. However, the cost is having eating more food and made more fat. Another one of these cycles. So if you're burning less fat, then your body is saying, wait a second, I'm in a low energy state, which means I'm trying to conserve fat, which then means you continue to burn less. It's, again, one of these cycles that causes, it sort of makes sense, and especially when you look at diets and how you gain weight and bring it back, that if you start triggering these cycles for whatever reason, and I'll get into some of the reasons why you would trigger it, then you're kind of just go, it's very easy to regain the weight. So he goes and he's going to compare it to the animal kingdom here. This is the same biology that is observed in animals preparing for hibernation. In fact, the biology of animals that are putting on fat has remarkable similarities to that of the majority of humans who are struggling with their weight. There's another excuse, I'm hibernating, suggesting that the underlying reason for human obesity is that we have turned on the same survival switch used by animals in nature. And if we can understand how we turned on this switch, we can figure out the cause of obesity and perhaps how to cure it. Goes on and says, the evidence is overwhelming. The primary reason we are becoming fat is not our culture, it is our biology. So he's saying primary here. He's not saying the only, but he's saying, yes, the overnutrition thing has a part to play. It's kind of important to not eat so much and to exercise some more, but the primary reason he's saying is biology. Our culture is responding to our biology. However, we have unwittingly activated nature's survival switch. This is why we can lose weight temporarily through dieting and exercise, but have trouble keeping it off. While there is much more to be learned about what turns the survival switch on and off for animals in the wild, I have an educated guess based on research for what triggers it. Specifically, I believe that, at least in some animals, the survival program is initiated by eating a specific food with unique properties that extend beyond its caloric content. This special food is called fructose. 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 Our enemy. So what is fructose? So we know glucose, fructose, sugars. Let me kind of give a little background of it. Here, he goes in chapter 3. Fructose, the main sugar we'll be discussing here, is a type of carbohydrate. Again, carbohydrates. We've all heard kind of how we've heard simple, complex carbohydrates. It is chemically similar to another commonly discussed sugar, glucose, he says, but both are simple sugars as they exist as single molecules. Fructose is commonly referred to as fruit sugar because it is the major sugar in fruit and honey and is the reason these foods taste sweet. Glucose, although it is also found in grains, beans, and vegetables, is sometimes referred to as blood sugar. It is the main sugar found in our blood. It is also the main fuel used by the body. Table sugar, or sucrose, is called double sugar, formed from a fructose and glucose molecule bonded together. That means when you eat table sugar, the bonds that hold fructose and glucose together must first be separated by an enzyme in the small intestine, allowing both single molecules to be absorbed separately. Fructose and glucose can also be mixed together, unbonded, to form a liquid known as high fructose corn syrup, HFCS. I think that's something we are probably all familiar with also. The ratio of fructose to glucose in HFCS can vary, but high fructose corn syrup tends to have a different ratio than table sugar, particularly in beverages where it ranges from 55-45 fructose glucose to as high as 65-35 in some fountain drinks. Most of the fructose we eat comes not from fruit and honey, but from table sugar or from high fructose corn syrups added to foods. They are the two most common sources of added sugar. So I think we're probably familiar with that. So he's getting back to high fructose corn syrup is what's largely making this survival switch go and getting us on this spiral that I just talked about. I guess you might be saying, well, I guess we've known that for quite a while, right? What's new here? I guess what's new here is the theory that this has all been set up from our physiology over time. And he gets into much more detail throughout the book in regards to what foods to eat, how this is triggered, what are some of the things that you could do to not trigger the survival switch. It gets into quite a lot of detail in regards to that. And that's really kind of what's in the rest of the book. So I just wanted to cover kind of the theory that he's laid out, that this is a biological, physiological process that we've kind of developed as human beings over time through evolution, right? And that we've kind of struggled with that. And I think, and even though we might have known kind of the end result was the sugars, and maybe someday they'll decide it wasn't the sugars. It's something else that's triggering the survival switch. But at least from the theory of it, it sort of all seems to make sense to me. And he's brought in this leptin resistance, what that is being used in the research in the drugs now, and as I said, I'm not going to get into all the details on what he recommends eating and when to eat it. But basically, the message I got was you can't just wean yourself slowly off of sugar, which kind of depressed me, right? I'm like, okay, I'll eat one cookie instead of two cookies, or I'll drink a couple less soft drinks. He's saying, yeah, no, that's not going to reset your switch. Your switch is just going to say, well, it's going to stay in the off position, basically. To reset the switch, you really have to dramatically reduce your fructose intake for a period of time. And now I think he acknowledges that we need additional research on how long a period of that time is, and does that vary by different people and their different metabolic states. So there's much work to be done there, to kind of say, okay, what do we need to do to kind of push that switch back in the on position, right? He's saying that there's literally a switch. It's not a you're halfway there, so you're going to get half the benefit. It's on or it's off. And he's saying the way to reset that is you have to dramatically reduce it to kind of reset it, reduce your intake of fructose to kind of reset it to square one. I'm not mentally ready for that yet. I just read this book in the last month or so, and I'm kind of doing the weaning thing to see and hope whether that works, because I've never been a big fan of I guess what they call cold turkey and white knuckling it through a period of time. I've never been that kind of dieter. I'm always been, well, I'll just moderate my intake, and that I guess helps a little bit, but it's not going to reset the switch. I mean, it's not going to. You might lose a little bit of weight. You might feel a little bit better by doing that, but he's saying you really have to. If you got the switch in the off position, or the survival switch in the on position, then you're putting on fat. To switch it off, you have to do something dramatic. He said, and he also pointed out over time, we've kind of, unfortunately, turning it to the on position is an accumulated thing, but turning it off, you've got to do it. I don't necessarily, like I said, I think he needs to do some research in regards to that. It seems to me that if you can slowly turn the survival switch on, you should be able to slowly turn it off, sort of like a dimmer switch rather than an on and off switch. But he's saying it's an on and off switch. But I'm trying here, so we'll see how it can't hurt to eat less sugar in either case. So that's kind of the journey I'm going to go on and see. That's kind of what I've taken away from this book. As I said, there's a lot of detail. What I've read is kind of just the setup in the first couple of chapters, and then he kind of goes into more detail in regards to the science behind it, and specifically sort of the diets and sort of what he recommends you do, and very good education about as we talked about, fructose is in fruit. He's not suggesting that you don't eat fruit, but different fruits have different effects, and if you're gonna eat something with high fructose, eat it slowly rather than quickly. If you're going to drink a soft drink, drink it slowly over time, because he said, the way our system processes it, if you drink it all at once, you will send yourself into a state that will then build fat quicker. So that's something I learned also, to kind of, if you're going to do it, eat it slowly so you can let your system metabolize it, and you're not kind of flipping that switch even further. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it was informative. It was a little different. Me talking about a little bit of health science, I guess. It's not something I'm an expert on or terribly comfortable with, but I thought this book was interesting, and I hope you enjoyed the podcast and go out and read the book. Again, the name of the book is, let me get it here, Nature Wants Us to Be Fat, The Surprising Science Behind Why We Gain Weight and How We Can Prevent and Reverse It by Dr. Richard Johnson. Again, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care.